Good afternoon, Jack.
Hi,
Uh,
Bob.
Good to see you. I think we have some developments that we can discuss. One that's literally right off the presses in the Abriego Garcia case. And so let's begin with that. Describe for our audience what happened, and then let's discuss it.
Sure. The district court, this is in the case of the person who was mistakenly deported at the Supreme Court, issued emergency relief. And on remand, the district court judge in Maryland clarified her injunction and ordered discovery basically about what steps the government was taking and just basic factual information about and discovery about what happened and what steps the government was taking in connection with the deportation and the facilitation of return. The government did not like this in clarification and sought a stay of the injunction and of the discovery order in the Fourth Circuit. And earlier this afternoon, the Fourth Circuit, in an opinion written by Judge Wilkinson and joined by two other judges, basically denied the government's relief. And I will I will describe the opinion as follows. It was basically a strongly but respectfully worded opinion that I read as saying, telling the government, please stop engaging with the courts in bad faith. Please start following the law. Courts aren't perfect. We're doing our best, and we're going to ask you to do your best. That's the way I interpret the essence of the stay denial. What do you think?
I couldn't agree more. It's an extraordinary document. It really is. It lays it on the line with the administration in respectful but very strong terms, describes the administration's position as shocking, and really calls attention to what the administration appears to be doing here, why it is antithetical to the rule of law, and why it's important for both branches now to step back in the interests of both from the brink here of a showdown. And I can't imagine anything more gracefully worded. And as you point out, all of the judges on the panel joined in it. It's a remarkable document.
So, but then the question is, I mean, it gives, does it give the Trump administration an off ramp? They seem to want to have a fight here. Judge Wilkinson is a moderate conservative judge appointed by President Reagan, highly respected throughout the federal judiciary. Hard to predict how they react.
Of course, it's impossible to know how they're going to react. And as we've seen, this particular president and his administration, as a matter of their basic rule book, like to double down and triple down. However, this is a warning from a highly respected judge, and certainly not somebody they can describe as a radical left wing lunatic, who
True.
making it very, very clear that things have just gone too far. And it'll be very interesting if we ever can know the story of this, and maybe there'll be some leaking, what the lawyers in this administration are going to tell this president about the direction that he's headed here, because he's inviting a showdown. But I think Wilkinson is effectively saying that he's simply on the wrong side of fundamental constitutional values and will not be able to publicly sustain that position. And so he's inviting him to step back from the brink in strongly worded terms, but respectful terms. So there has to be some conversation within the White House about how to respond to this.
I agree, but you said you phrased it as asking what the lawyers would tell the president, and I'm not. It's not clear to me that the lawyers are speaking to the president. There seems to, so I'm not sure that the lawyers are going to. In a case like this, normally it would be the Solicitor General would be in the room, the White House counsel would be in the room, uh, even though it's in the Court of Appeals. I mean, and they would be advising the administration how to react. I would be shocked if the SG or maybe the AG will show up, but she's certainly not going to be pushing back on the president's wishes. Um, so the question is whether the Trump administration wants to, up the stakes. I mean, this is Judge Wilkinson's opinion strikes me as a fair accounting of what the Supreme Court kind of unanimously asked the administration to do. He did not order them to conduct diplomacy, and he gave the executive branch deference. So we'll see what happens from here. I mean, it is the clearest statement from a Court of Appeals judge yet that the administration has been acting in bad faith, dangerously so, and basically saying, "Please stop doing this for our country." That's basically the message of
Absolutely.
the opinion, and we'll see. I mean, I have to say, I would be surprised if they back down at this point, but we'll see what they do.
Yes, and certainly, no guarantee that they'll back down, or they may back down but pretend that they're not backing down, which is also a standard technique in this administration. On the part of lawyers, just if I put my former White House counsel's hat on, again, and this is a point we've returned to time and time again, the response they have here is going to affect not only their position in this case, it's going to affect how the courts view everything else that they do. If they decide to declare war on the federal court system, and I don't have it in front of me, but the Wilkinson order suggests that this is pervasive bad faith, pervasive. That is there's a price to be paid for that. And maybe the administration believes that it can tough that out. But I would not put my money on the administration in that showdown.
I mean, we've been talking about this a few times now. I don't know if they perceive a price. I mean, we're going to find out. The response to this order will tell us whether they're willing to perceive a price. I mean, in a way, it's a crazy context to have a constitutional showdown since they admitted error and it's so easy to correct the error. And as they said, they can correct the error and then send him out of the country, Abrego Garcia, to another country consistent with the law. But on the other hand, it's a perfect case maybe for them to have a political showdown because it's an immigration deportation context. They've been demonizing this guy, and maybe the small stakes on the kind of consequences of this particular case, the relatively small stakes, obviously big stakes for him. Maybe that's the context they want to have a fight. None of it makes sense to me.
It doesn't make sense to me either. But this is a good time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This is a good time to switch over to other problems they have in a different courtroom,
Yeah,
which is with Judge Boasberg. So
yeah,
let's talk about that.
yeah. Also, Judge Boasberg, was it yesterday that he issued his
Yesterday.
opinion finding probable cause that the government uh, willfully disobeyed his orders with regard to the deportation of the Venezuelan terrorist group, alleged Venezuelan terrorist group members under the Alien Enemies Act. And he, in a very methodical, a firm but judicious opinion, Judge Boasberg went through all the facts very carefully and all of the elements of contempt and found that the government wasn't had probable cause to think that they were in contempt. I'll just tell you, I'll give you a couple reactions and then you can tell me what you think. One
Mhm.
reaction was I thought the opinion was very strong on the law. The weakest part and the part where I wouldn't say that Judge Boasberg struggled, but he spent the most time doing fancy legal analysis was with regard to whether uh, the court was clear and reasonably specific in its orders. And all of this stuff was happening when the government was playing games initially in real time, when the planes were leaving and Boasberg was trying to figure out what was going on. I found the opinion persuasive, but that was the least persuasive of the legal analysis. The rest of it I thought was airtight. But the bigger picture question is whether Boasberg exercised prudence in going this route. I just can't imagine a circumstance where he can succeed in holding the government in contempt because there won't be a prosecution of contempt. The and if the marshal tries, so who can prosecute? The government's not going to prosecute. Under Rule 42, Boasberg can appoint an outside prosecutor. As Steve Vladeck said in his Substack this morning, and I agree with him, that is almost certainly unconstitutional. Even if they found someone to prosecute, the marshal who would be enforcing the order is basically works for the attorney general and ultimately can be removed by the president. And then on top of that, there could be a pardon. So this is no, I don't think anyone in the government is going to end up in jail or even subject to a it's going to be hard to have a contempt order enforced against them. So that raises the question, what is the point of this order if it's bound to ultimately in that respect fail? Does it have another point?
It seems to me that he's faced with a choice, which is to do something that I characterize as sort of quietly diffusing the controversy, with the burden of diffusing the controversy falling on the court, while the administration continues to push and push and push its own program here of defiance and sharp rhetoric directed against the courts. It chooses between that, diffusing this tension, and concluding that a record has to be established. It just has to do what judges do. It has to act the way judges act. And in the face of the extraordinary record here that he's compiling and establishing, I think in pretty clear terms, I think his view is that that's more important at this point than anything else, because if he doesn't do that, then he's permitting the administration to continue to, in effect, bully the courts into a corner. They're always worried about defiance. They're worried about letting things get out of control, but he's not worried about that.
Yeah.
And so the more they give him, the more ground that he will take. And I think Boasberg's conclusion was, I have to be a judge here and do what I have to do based on the facts that I found, judiciously sort of assessed, and the law appropriately applied to it. And I think he did that.
Yeah. As you know, when we were texting this morning, I wasn't sure that that was the right answer, but I've been persuaded over the course of the day. And I'll just summarize and put in my words what you just said, and that is all Boasberg can do is his job.
Exactly.
And he did his job in his lane, and he did it well. And if the rest of the system means that, the contempt is not ultimately going to be successful, he established a record, he applied the law, and that was his job. And that's an important thing to do, even if it ultimately ends up being ignored.
Yes, and totally agree with all of that. And then I noticed one other comment in the Wilkinson order in that other case, or in the Wilkinson opinion in that other case, where he refers to the lower court judge as a fine judge, and in effect says
Yeah.
you're not going to get anywhere by just in effect continuously attacking the lower court judges. We're taking notice of how you're treating district courts in this system, and we're going to stand up for them. We're going to
Yeah.
stand up for judges who are doing their duty, and that applies to Boasberg as well.
Yeah. I agree, except, whether it's true that the Trump administration is not going to get anywhere, as you put it, from this atrocious behavior before courts, especially lower courts. They've been notably more respectful in the Supreme Court for various reasons. I think it's an open question about, I mean, it's clearly a strategy that is not going to win any fans in the federal judiciary. And, I don't know what their end game is, but I agree it cannot win them any favors in the Article 3 arena.
Right. And the message I thought from Wilkinson was, and by the way, I'm now really paraphrasing and extending a little bit.
Yeah.
You can go to the Supreme Court and be as respectful as you want, but we'll notice the disrespect that you've shown down the line.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that that's an important point for them to have made, or for Wilkinson in particular to have made, for the panel to have made. Thanks, Jack. I think we'll stop there. Obviously, we're going to return to the subject in the future, but for now, have a good evening.
Thanks, Bob. You too.